Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta. This is Child Abuse Prevention, and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is up to us. It's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and the chat room is open there tonight if you'd like to sit in the chat room. And glad to be here. Glad to be able to bring out this information, and thanks to everyone who's tuning into all my shows. I really appreciate it. Every time I look to see how many shows have been listened to, I can't believe it. I got like 15,500 shows listened to. So that's just amazing. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate everybody who's tuning in. And tonight I want to talk about, it's an article called Child Sex Trafficking, an International Threat to the Wellness of Children, written by Mary C. Burke, PhD, and it's from www.endhumantrafficking.org /files/brief report _child_slavery.pdf. And so that's from www.endhumantrafficking.org. And I think this is something that we can't talk about this enough, you know. The issues of child sex trafficking, it's just absolutely horrific what's going on out there. Parents are selling their children for drug money. Parents are involved in trafficking their own children because they are involved in child pornography and, doing these sexually explicit videos with their own children and then putting them all over the web and trading with different people. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that this is going on in North America. It's mind-boggling that it's going on anywhere in the world. It makes me sick, but especially in North America. You know what I mean? Like, this is ridiculous. People should know that children are not sex toys, and that children are not meant to be used sexually. Children are children and should be allowed to be children, and I just can't believe that this is still going on. It's been going on forever, but thank God there's laws now in place that actually say it's illegal. It's against the law. And I'm so happy every time I hear of a bust, people getting busted, these child sex trafficking rings and pornography rings and whatnot. Every time they get busted, I'm so happy. But then right behind them comes another, 600 or 700 more people doing this. So the FBI and ICAC and all those guys have a real hard time trying to, to keep up with these crazy, sick individuals who think that it's perfectly okay to use a child sexually. And, I hope they bust them all. That's my thoughts on the whole thing, and put them all away for life, right? But that's just my opinion. So glad to be here. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll get right into this article. It's a great article. It's a PDF actually, and but I'll pop the link into the chat room just in case you want to check that out for yourself. I hope that you do go and read this. There's a lot of information out there on child sex trafficking and the whole issues that surround it, and it's absolutely horrific what's going on with children out here today, and has been for years and years and years. And now, it's being addressed, which is great because people are actually starting to take note, and people are starting to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and no child deserves to be abused in any way, and especially sexually abused. This is it doesn't matter, abuse of any kind, towards a child is incredibly wrong, and people just need to stop abusing children. And so, I'm really, glad to be able to talk about this topic here tonight. So this is Child Sex Trafficking, an International Threat to the Wellness of Children by Mary C. Burke, B-U-R-K-E, Ph.D. And she says here, children are our hope. They are our inspiration for much of the humanitarian work in which many around the world are involved. Threats to the well-being of children are numerous. In addition to many living in less than stable familial environments, children today are continually forced to face the symptoms of a conflict-ridden society, regardless of their country of origin. And it says, creating an environment that extends beyond safety and includes meeting their basic need for love, food, love, nurturing continues to be a goal. This must remain a goal as children and the women who care for them remain the most vulnerable to mistreatment and neglect in even the most economically advantaged countries. And that's like, North America, Canada, the United States. It's just absolutely ridiculous that this would be happening in our countries because, we're, some of the most wealthiest countries going, and yet look at the problems that we have. You can see just how, socially sick we are as a society, right? to know that there's so many people who abuse children, there's so many people who sexually use children, there's so many child sexual predators out there. And parents, if you don't believe that that's true, you better start looking around and get the information and learn how to protect your children, because your children are sitting ducks. You know, if you don't have the information on how to protect your children, you know, and talk with them about the issues of, you know, good touch, bad touch at when age appropriate times and whatnot. But, you know, if you don't educate yourself and your children, they're just sitting ducks, because these child sexual predators are everywhere, and they are looking for children who are the most vulnerable, which would be the kids that don't have the knowledge, you know, to protect themselves, kids that are out by themselves running around, kids that are, you know, slipping through the cracks, right? And so, if you know, it can happen to anyone. This is not this has nothing to do with how rich or poor you are, what kind of neighborhood you live in, you know, what size of city or town you live in, or, you know, what ethnic background you are. It actually has absolutely nothing to do with it. Children are just vulnerable, and there's so many sick people out there, and they're just waiting to get a hold of children. So, you know, they're waiting to get a hold of your child, right? And it's really quite pathetic that parents won't educate themselves, even though the information is out there. And because of the information age, this is what it's all about, the internet. There's all kinds of great information out there for parents on how to protect your child, and what, you know, from online sexual predators to, you know, sexual predators that could, you know, possibly get a hold of your child at a bus stop, or your child's walking home from school, or, you know, they're on their way to their friend's house to play after school. Maybe they're on their way to a sport, like to their sporting event that maybe they belong to a sports club, some type, you know, and after school activities, right? You got to know where your child is, and you have to know what they're doing. It's a sad situation. Children should be allowed to go and do things without having to be, you know, victims of child sexual predators and pedophiles and whatnot, who would love to get a hold of them and use them sexually and then discard them. But sadly enough, that's just not the case, because this world's full of really sick people. And these sick people want to hurt your child, man. So I'm telling you, parents, you get the information and you make sure that you know how to keep yourself safe as well as your family safe and your children safe, because they really are sitting ducks. And it doesn't matter where you live, you're not excluded. And that's the sad part, right? Children should be safe and free to do things without having to be, you know, concerned whether some crazy sick individual is going to try to get a hold of them and sodomize them or rape them or molest them in some way, right? And then kill them, or, you know, maybe not kill them. But it's sad. It's absolutely sad how many children become victims of child sexual predators and whatnot. And then, you know, they can end up in child sex trafficking rings, right? Where do you think all these missing children are? You know what I mean? Like, stop and think about that for a minute. There are literally, I don't know, millions of missing children around the world, and there's just, I don't know how many, I don't know the latest stats in the United States and Canada, but there are so many missing children. And where do you think they are? Nobody knows where they are. Well, they're in child sex rings. That's where they're at. They're in human trafficking, child sex trafficking rings, and they find their little bodies dumped. You know, they generally find these little babies, children's bodies dumped somewhere eventually, and it's just absolutely horrific. And it has got to stop, and I just can't believe that there's not more people shouting out about this and saying that this has got to stop, and people need to start protecting their children, and everyone needs to get involved, right? Because should never be happening. This should never happen to a child, never. And it happens all the time. That's sad. It says, what follows is a short overview of the status of children worldwide with regard to safety and well-being information about human trafficking and recommendations for citizen involvement in prevention of the sex trafficking of children. So Mary C. Burke here writes that integral to the healthy physical and psychological development of children is that their basic needs are consistently met. And research demonstrates that in addition to physical needs such as safety, food, shelter, and access to medical care, children's psychological wellness is contingent on the nature of relationship with those primarily responsible for their care, specifically beginning at birth. And the relationship must be characterized by security and uninterrupted attachment with their primary caregivers, as this plays a significant role in the healthy development into adulthood. And in spite of the focus on issues related to children, she says, the number of children whose basic physical needs are not met and whose attachment to primary caregivers is at risk remains a worldwide problem. The number of children who continue to live in poverty and without sufficient nutritional sustenance is alarmingly significant. According to a recent report published by the United Nations Children's Fund, the UNICEF, 1 in 4 children under the age of 5 is underweight and undernourished. That was in 2006, so who knows how many it is now. The report also indicates that 5.6 million children die yearly. That's almost 6 million children dying yearly, in part because they are undernourished. Violence against children is also alarmingly high. According to Human Rights Watch 2001, millions of children experience violence firsthand and vicariously in places such as their homes, in the homes of those they trust, in orphanages, in refugee camps, and in situations of armed conflict. And I mean, we know this, worldwide. It's just a huge mess out there for children. And, we have to stand up for them, right, and stand up for their rights. And the very basic right to, is their right to life. Everyone enjoys the right to life. That's our human right. And children have the right to life, too. Sadly enough, there's all these parents out here who don't know about that and kill their children. We'll lose so many tonight just in North America. Like just in the United States alone, up to 5 children will be killed and murdered at the hands of their parents or caregivers. And who knows how many in Canada. Canada likes to keep it all swept under the carpet, you know what I mean? But at least in the States they're talking about it and reporting it. Canada has the numbers too. They just don't bother to report most of it. And so it says, in a world where women continue to carry the bulk of the responsibility for child care, it is important to consider their status when considering the status of children. Research consistently shows that violence against women and intimate partner violence in particular is linked to maternal mortality and child survival. That was from Etienne, Dahlberg, and Mercy, 2002. And worldwide, 10 to 69%, which is a crazy, spread there, 10 to 69% of women reported being physically assaulted by an intimate male partner at some point in their lives. And that was from the same reporting from Etienne, Dahlberg, and Mercy. So that's, either from 10 to 70% of women reported being physically assaulted by an intimate male partner at some point in their lives, and that's worldwide. So if you think about that, at the highest level, nearly 70% of women worldwide. And they've done the studies. I actually just saw an article not too long ago, more recent article that was published about that, and they did say that the numbers were very close. It's a huge worldwide issue. Women, like in North America, people fought and died for women's rights, over here, and women do have rights, but in so many other countries they really don't. And the children don't have rights either in so many countries, right? So it's only the men that have the rights in many countries, and the whole issue of women, being assaulted and physically abused or raped, killed at the hands of their male partners or their husbands, or their partners. It's absolutely horrific what's going on around the world. It's perfectly legal in those countries. Actually, they have laws against it. Quite often there's laws in those countries. I'm speaking specifically about Afghanistan. Afghanistan has laws against, child abuse. They also have laws against domestic violence and abusing their women, right? But the whole issue is they're not upheld. So they do have them written down. They're written down in the law books, but nobody upholds them. So see, over there, you can kill your wife and get away with it. You just bury them out in the backyard and go get another wife, It's very, very sad what's going on around the world. But look, you think about the worldwide issue, and then you think about what's going on in North America, just in the United States, we'll say. You think about the amount of women in the United States alone that suffer at the hands of their partner, and then the children in the home are suffering as well. It's too many. It's way too many. And it just seems to me that as a society and as a people, as a human race, that we would have already figured out the programs that are going to help people. You know what I mean? Because $105 billion, that's with a B, $105 billion is spent annually because of child abuse. So if you think about that, where's this $105 billion going to? It's not for prevention. It's going to because of child abuse, right? So why are we not spending, 500 or 600 billion with a B, billion, and stop child abuse? And that way we don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, wouldn't that be great? That's my issue. Yeah, and stop domestic violence, right? Get the programs out there. Get people involved. There's lots of people that want to get involved. They can't afford to go to school. They don't have time to go to school. They need training. They need to get, trained up really quickly. There could be all kinds of really good help out there, and programs thrown up so quick if the funding was there. Where's this $105 billion going? That's what I'd like to know. But anyway, it's absolutely pathetic because nothing's being done, and children, there's one article that I saw in not too long ago. This might have been late summer. I saw this article, and Elizabeth Brawley from Dreamcatchers for Abused Children and myself were talking about it on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, and we were talking about this article, and they were saying that there's so many abused children in this one city in Texas, and we were not picking on Texas. It just happened to be this article that came out, and they were saying that in this one city in Texas there was so many abused children that agency could not help them, and they were on a waiting list. So there was no support for them until they could get to them, because there were so many that they couldn't even get to them. Now, what does that say? You know what I mean? And why are the programs not in place? So no child deserves to be abused. See, we're not talking about a child with a skinned knee and, maybe a stubbed toe. We're talking about abused children, children who are beaten, kicked around, burned, raped, right, sodomized, any number of things. I mean, the whole issues of child abuse, it's not discipline. We're not talking about a child, getting a simple spanking and then ending up in the waiting list for help. We're talking about children who have been abused. And if you've never been abused, then you might not know exactly what child abuse is all about. It is torture. It is a systematic, torture of a child, right? Whether it's physical, emotional, verbal, psychological, sexual, and neglect. It's horrific what these children are going through out here, and they're being stabbed, they're being burned, they're being poisoned. Many children are being poisoned by their parents. I saw 2 articles actually tonight that came out, posted on Dreamcatchers for Abused Children's website, the child abuse headlines, where one was a baby was poisoned with bleach, and another one was poisoned with meth. The mother had methamphetamines in the baby's sippy cup, and the baby drank it and was poisoned. So people are poisoning their children, they're killing their children, they're raping children, they're suffocating their children, they're just doing all these horrible things to their children. And why is this happening? $105 billion is going out annually, and why are we not stopping this? This is just a huge problem. So if you think about that going on in North America, you can think about what's going on around the world, right? Because that just gives you one picture of one place, like let's say just the United States alone. It's such a huge issue. And then if you take into account what's going on around the world with children, oh my God, it is just mind-boggling. And children do not deserve to be abused, right? No one does. No one deserves to be abused, not a man, a woman, or a child, right? And so, but I'm standing up for children because children have no voice, and they really need our voices, right? So this is absolutely horrific what's going on around the world. It says, according to the World Health Organization, 40 to 70% of the homicides of women are committed by intimate partners. Finally, worldwide, 1 in 3 women have been beaten, coerced into sex, or similarly abused in their lifetime. And that's from Hayes, Ellsberg, and Gottmuller, 1999. It says, this data does not reflect the numbers of women who experience threats to safety, physical abuse, rape, and other violence consequent of armed conflict and other situations of political instability. So that's not even including the stuff that's happening in countries like Africa where, armed, rebel groups of militiamen are running around raping everybody in sight, including the men, right? I mean, these people aren't even just picking on the women, they're raping the men too. They're just raping everybody, right? But, they're just very sick individuals, and I don't know what it's going to take to change their minds so that they would not be doing what they're doing. But whether they ever could, I don't know. They'd have to be so sick, such a huge sick individual to be able to do that. But anyway, several factors are known to contribute to increased vulnerability of children and women to violence and neglect. And these include lower social status, state economic instability, political conflict, and natural disaster. Each of these 4 factors contributes uniquely to human trafficking, one of the most horrifying and dangerous threats to the safety and well-being of this group. So she's talking about the human trafficking. Human trafficking has very recently come to the fore of consciousness in our global community. Human trafficking is an appalling abuse of basic human rights that affects the most vulnerable among us and exists in almost every country in the world. Also referred to as trafficking in humans or simply as trafficking, this human rights violation is a form of modern-day slavery in which women, men, and children are targeted for sexual or other forms of economic exploitation. The United Nations includes in its definition of human trafficking all acts related to the recruitment, transport, sale, or purchase of individuals through force, fraud, or other coercive means for the purpose of economic exploitation. And this definition has been widely accepted by those involved in fighting the illegal activity of trafficking, and it has been used as the foundation for lawmaking in countries worldwide. And individuals who are fraudulently pulled into trafficking situations find themselves held hostage and under the control of the trafficker upon arrival at their destination. Often their physical movement is restricted, their identification papers are confiscated, and the lives of their families are threatened if they are not compliant with the rules established by the traffickers. And for those trafficked across international borders, traffickers will play on victims' distrust and fear of authorities in the country by telling them that they will be imprisoned or deported if they seek assistance. She goes on to talk about this. She said that Human Rights Watch and the State Department of the United States are among those who estimate that 800,000 to 900,000 women, men, and children are trafficked across international borders each year for the purpose of economic exploitation, with approximately 100,000 more trafficked within the borders of their own countries. And they said that the UN agency responsible for addressing labor standards and social protection issues estimates that there are 12.3 million people enslaved in forced labor, bonded labor, forced child labor, sexual servitude, and involuntary servitude at any given time. 12.3 million people. I mean, that's crazy. That's insane. This is 2010. This is like 2010. When are we going to wake up and smell the coffee? Like, that is absolutely horrible. That the rest of the world just casually walks on by and goes and paints their nails and drinks their coffee and, takes the dog out for a walk and absolutely thinks nothing about the fact that there's at least, at any given time, 12.3 million people still enslaved around the world, and that includes children, and that includes forced sexual servitude. This is absolutely ridiculous. It shouldn't be happening. So of those victims of transnational trafficking, estimates indicate that approximately 80% are women and girls, up to 50% are minors, and the majority are trafficked into commercial sexual exploitation. Information from the United Nations Office of Drug Control and Crime Prevention, which is www.odccp.org, approximately 2 million women and girls are trafficked yearly. 2 million. 2 million women and girls are trafficked yearly, approximately. That's horrible. Shouldn't even be one. Who are these sick people out here who are actually, the buyers, the ones who are wanting this? See, if there was not a need, they wouldn't be trafficking them because there wouldn't be a need. So who are these sick individuals that are wanting to get a hold of these 2 million women and girls to use them sexually? Right? I mean, this tells you these are people sitting in your offices. These are people driving in cars right next to you. These are people that work down in the regular stores downtown. This is right, people. Get this through your heads, man. This is people that we work with, that we walk by every day, that would use, a woman or a child sexually for their own purposes, who is being held as a sex slave. I mean, this makes me sick. And it should never be happening, and I hope they bust every single one of those people out there that's involved. It says it is further estimated that global trade in women as merchandise for sex industries generates between $7 and $12 billion annually. That's from Hughes 2000, so who knows what it is now. In addition to the factors noted above, the marginalized status of women, the sex tourism industry, and the quest for inexpensive labor contribute to this atrocious exploitation of humanity. Globalism also has contributed significantly to the growth of this black market industry, making it easier to advertise, buy, and sell women and children all over the world. I mean, this is ridiculous that this is going on. But you think about how many missing children there are in the United States alone. When you just go to some of those missing children websites and check out. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, thank God. And you can go to those websites and see just how many missing children there are. And a lot of those children end up in child sex trafficking rings. It's absolutely horrible. And these people, these families, they don't know where that child is, and they're just hoping that child is found and brought home to them. And a lot of times those children are killed, once they're used up, and they're just used and, abused and sexually used, and then they're just killed and murdered and buried someplace or dumped in a bin somewhere. It's very, very sad, but this is the truth, and it's very, we have to face this. This is real, it's happening, and it's not some movie or some screenplay. This is real life for these people. And these people that are involved in this, that are being forced to be sex slaves, these children, that's no way for a child to live. That's no way for a child to be treated. You know what I mean? Children are not sex toys. I don't know what sick individual out there thinks that it's okay to use a child sexually in any way, and I don't care who they are. I don't care what kind of problems they have, and I don't care who their parents are and who their families are. I really don't care about the child sexual predators and these people out here who would use a child sexually for their own sexual purposes. Children are not sex toys. Children are children, and they should be allowed to be children, right? And I have a huge issue with this, as you can pretty much tell, because I was molested as a child and sexually abused, and so I have a real problem with child sexual abuse. And, you know, it just makes me angry because I know so many people, myself, I personally know so many people, including men, who were sexually abused as children. So that whole thing about, you know, people saying, oh, there's just no such thing as child abuse, and this just doesn't happen, and why should we have to care, and what does it really matter? Well, it does matter. And that whole saying about, you know, the facts out there, the stats out there that were done by government studies, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys being sexually abused in some way under the age of 18, you know, whether it's unwanted sexual touching, molestation, exploitation, or rape, you know. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys. I mean, I'm one of those 3. You know, so if you know me, then you know 1 already. And chances are you probably know more, but sometimes people don't come forward and say that they have been. But, you know, the whole issue is if we don't start talking about this stuff and we don't start, you know, standing up and saying this is wrong and children are not sex toys and they do not deserve to be treated this way. That's abuse and that's incredibly wrong. And parents are doing this to their children. You know, family members are doing this to their children. Teachers and coaches, priests and preachers, doctors, you know, neighbors, anybody, right? Why are people so incredibly sick that they can't just let a child keep their innocence and be a child? And, you know, thinking that they can use a child sexually for their own sexual purposes and thinking that it would not harm the child or that it would not hurt the child. You know, it's like, what is going on? I mean, why are we not standing up and screaming out about this? And all forms of child abuse. I mean, I'm not just talking about child sexual abuse. I mean, I was abused in every way, so there you go. The whole issue is that it's all incredibly wrong. And we all have to stand up and say, this is wrong. No child should ever be abused, and start getting, you know, something done. You know, our voices do count. They really do. They count where the funding goes. We direct where the funding goes. Every time you vote and lobby and make your vote count, you really are putting the funding where you're telling them to put the funding. So it's very important to get involved locally where you can, and also to get involved nationally, you know, to make your voice heard, and, you know, just make sure that the children in your own lives are not at risk for being abused, you know. Like parents, you know, if you work, you know, 2 jobs and your child is being looked after by somebody, make sure that you know who these people are that are looking after your child. Make sure your child is not being abused. You know, it's just so important because this happens. You know, if you start reading the child abuse headlines out there, you'll see that there are so many sick individuals out there that, you know, befriend families or that actually are in families, you know, grandparents, you know, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, you know, you name it. Any family member really can be a child sexual abuser. Many of them are, sadly enough. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys are abused. Guess what? 90 to 95% of abuse happens within the home, you know. It's all about education, you know. Get the education, learn how to protect your children and yourself, and know the signs and symptoms of abuse, you know, and know how to report it properly so that you don't don't mess the whole thing up for the child and it gets thrown out of court, right? Know how, you know, learn how to do this stuff. You never know when a child's going to come to you and say and disclose to you that they've been abused as a child, you know, that they're being abused. You never know, right? What would you say? What would you do? If you ask the wrong questions, it can be thrown out of court, and that child could end up back in the home, and they could be killed. This happens all the time. Make sure that you do know how to report it. Make sure that you do know the signs and symptoms of all the different kinds of abuse, every bit of it. You know, child sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, neglect. You know, make sure that you do know that, and also watch out for your kids so they do not become victims of child trafficking and, you know, and go missing, right? You don't want to be one of these parents out here crying out, wondering where your child is and whether they're being sexually abused and raped, and, you know, I mean, it's absolutely horrific. I know these parents out here, right? So make sure that you do everything you can to protect your children, right? It's just so important. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We have about a minute left. I'll be back on this weekend. You can check my show page and go and check this article. It's called www.endhumantrafficking.org, and child sex trafficking. It's written by Mary C. Burke, and it's really a great article. I hope you'll go read the rest of it. It's a PDF. And it's a great PDF. I hope you go finish it up. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Be a voice for the children out here. They need your voice. They need all of our voices, right? And we have to do everything we can to stop child abuse, everything we possibly can within our power, locally and nationally. Just get involved everywhere that you possibly can, because we don't want to lose any more children. And sadly enough, we'll lose so many tonight. And how many is acceptable? How many is acceptable? Not one in my books. So let's do what we can to help stop child abuse. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.